Hey everyone, welcome back to the Dairy Raid and another installment of Spring Forward, where we're looking back at what we have learned about the Badgers this spring and applying those lessons going forward towards fall camp in the 2026 season. Today's video is going to be a companion piece to the Substack article that I put up last week talking about offensive scheme and some of the new directions or different focus of the offense, at least from what we were able to gather from the bits and pieces that we got about the team during spring practice. And it wasn't much, but if you know how to look, you can learn a lot and you can extrapolate from there. And so before we get into this, I just want to make sure, like I said in the written piece, I am fully admitting that what I am going to be talking about today are conclusions that I am making about the offensive scheme based on my own football bias. Now, there are some universal truths to what we see football players do, but every coach has their own style. Every coach sees how the offense is moving differently. And so this is my interpretation of the plays, the drills that we're building towards plays, etc., that we saw during spring ball and how I think that they could be applied into the offense this upcoming season. And on the written piece, I went through a bunch of different plays, kind of play by play. Gonna group a couple of the plays here together and think a little bit more overall. But we are going to take some of the lessons that we learned this spring and we're going to apply them and see if we can figure out, with all these new pieces in the offense, what kind of offense should we expect once the Badgers hit the field against Notre Dame? Is it going to be a lot different than we saw last year? Or is it just going to be a continuation? Is it going to be the next step? We're going to see a lot of interesting things on the field this spring, and I think we can learn a lot from that. So let's take a look at it. The Badgers offense coming out of spring 2026. All right, so the first play we are going to talk about is, first we're going to kind of go in more in general. And like I said in my written piece, I think RPOs get a bad rap in that a lot of people just see RPOs as a dumbed down version of the passing game used by quarterbacks who can't read defenses properly. And to that, I say, first thing, most of the criticism with RPOs tend to come from people who don't know the difference between an RPO and a play action, or package play, etc. Or they think a zone read is an RPO or whatever. So that being said, there is some truth to the idea that an RPO is a simplified, I won't say dumbed down, I would say a simplified version of the passing game. In that, for a passing game to be successful, it does not need to be overly complicated. The basis of all offensive football is to try to put defensive players in conflict of assignment. And by doing so, you create opportunities for the offense to gain yards. An RPO is doing exactly that. It is putting a particular player or players in a position that no matter what they do, they are wrong. And so the example that we took from spring practice was seeing our quarterbacks working stick RPO action. So what is stick RPO action? Well, first thing, let's identify what a stick is. A stick is similar to a hitch, where it is a 5 to 6 yard to 7 yard route. I usually run my sticks at 6 yards. And we are going to break away from the read defender. In this particular case, we would call the Mike linebacker the read player. We break downhill here, and then if the linebacker broke to us, we would break to the sideline. If he doesn't, if he inserts, whatever, we're going to sit right there. So we're going to call that route right there our read route, and the Mike linebacker is our read defender. Now you can run this route with anybody in this formation, whoever you decide to read, but that is the basic read. Now we need to put this linebacker in a conflict of assignment. So depending on what run scheme you're running, we'll get that player in conflict. And what we could do here, I mean, we're a wide zone team, so what we could be working here is working wide, something like that. Now these backside defenders, we do need to give a run action. And so a lot of times, if we're covered to the backside, might just engage him. But in this particular case, I'm guessing we're going to try to do like we would on the backside of a wide zone, which is going to be arrest our forward momentum and try to get him moving upfield. And then backside, what we would probably end up doing is either just straight out kick and working him wide, or we're going to step down and then we're going to hinge. Whatever. We're going to engage who we have on the line. We need to give this action here. So in case the defense is reading our guards, etc., we want this middle linebacker to want to insert right there. That's the influence we want to give. We're going to continue to give that influence by having our back, working downhill to the A gap and looking to bang it right there, or continue through the B gap if necessary. That is our run track. And now we've set up our read. Quarterback, if we get any kind of flow or movement downhill, we know we've got space to throw the stick, or we can allow the receiver, or in this case, it's probably a tight end, to move a little bit farther in, throw it to the open space. Receivers out here, receivers and tight end. Again, I'd see this running out of a 2 tight end set. We're going to work the outlet. We're going to work the run. We're going to work the run. Remember, in college rules, we can make contact and maintain that contact up to 3 yards upfield and not be considered downfield. So we've set this up here. In this particular defensive alignment, this nickel box safety could become an issue. So like I drew it up in the article, I'm just going to send my outside receiver or tight end, however this player is, on just a little flat route to occupy this stinger, what I call a stinger, nickel back, to get him to widen. If he doesn't, it gives our quarterback a bail option to get it out here. Or we could also run our wide zone action here. We could just work across here. We could work across here to really sell it. Give a read here. Quarterback can keep off of the action and either hit stick or hit flat. So Just there, couple little nuances, a couple little different changes, and you can take a base play of our run game and make it as close to foolproof as we can in football. Nothing can be 100%, but in setting up a play like this, you give yourself the opportunity to be right 75% of the time as long as you execute. And you hit plays like this continuously. This linebacker and this overhang box safety are going to second guess their run fits, which may cause the free safety to have to come down and fill more, which opens up other ideas. So, simplified, yes, simple read. But in doing so, we are putting the defense in conflict. By putting the defense in conflict, we put ourselves as the offense in a win-win situation. All right, next up, I want to talk about the evolution of the Wisconsin passing game, hopefully away from the all or nothing kind of attitude that we had last season, where the passing game seemed to be either screens or play actions into nothing, or just chuck it deep looking for 50 yards when 10 would do. And to do so, obviously, we need to increase the use of the intermediate passing game, and a direction that you can definitely see them going with that intermediate passing game is to actually take on some ideas that Colton Joseph is comfortable with coming in from Old Dominion, and that is the use of crossing routes to not only set up multiple windows to open up that crossing route, but then to also use that route to manipulate coverage into opening up both more intermediate options, but also setting up the deep pass. So in my written piece on Substack, I went through 3 different plays. We're going to kind of lump these 3 together in this section to talk about how these routes coming across the field and over the middle set us up for both short, or all 3, short, medium, and deep options. And what we heard a lot about this spring was the emergence of Tyrell Henry. And when you look at the film of some of the completions that we saw of Tyrell Henry, it reminded me actually a lot of what we used to do with Will Pauling. And very air raid style type concepts. And so from that idea, we're able to extrapolate and kind of think of an idea of how these plays would actually set up. So one in particular that we saw was just really your basic Y cross, where we would put Tyrell Henry in the slot here. We work from depth under the first defender, over the second, and then depending on where the landmark is, whether it be 15 yards, whether it would be 10 yards, we would work across the field. So that's kind of the base route of this concept. But how we get to that route, there are so many different options and different kind of tags we can put around it that can take one simple route and build really an entire passing game. And when you look at how it was ran, and again, you couldn't see much from the film clip, but it really looked like they ran it probably out of a 3-by-1 look like this, where your initial read is actually some either an out or some kind of choice route from this number 1 receiver on the single receiver side. So however you want to run it, basically creating a high-low stress on a corner and an inside-out stress on the boundary safety. And then from there, it just depends on how you build it up. We could see is usually you get some kind of trailing route, which would either be like a dig or a post coming in from behind, and then a placeholder route to hold any kind of flat defender from sinking. And so your route progression would be 3 steps to the single receiver, to the cross, to the dig. And a receiver like Tyrell Henry can really get lost in the mess across the field. And there's a lot of windows where he could open up. We get some kind of blitz here. It creates a hot space right here. But then if not, he's going to continue to work across the formation. And we're going to, again, create inside out and high-low stress here on the single receiver side. And if we remember the clips that we saw him catch a pass like this in the end zone earlier in the spring. That's one way we can use a crossing route here to set up routes behind. Another one that we saw, which I actually really liked, is they ran it out of a compressed formation, and they ran what we call a follow. So again, we're going to get a crossing route, and I believe this time, this crossing route was, I believe this was Eugene Hilton, and we ran a follow where we would get an outside release from this number 3 receiver and then sneak him in behind and have him traveling in the wake of this crossing route. And then the number 1 receiver is either going to find a soft spot and sit down again to hold any kind of flat defender down to open up this space in behind. You could also just run him on a simple go or an outside breaking route to try to hold the field side safety. But whatever you want to do, you're using the idea of the basic crossing route and now using it. We've hit this route a few times, and we really get these defenders, especially the linebackers, to want to sit vertically to take away and to force this crossing route up over the safety or into the safety's area anyways. And by doing so, you create a space in behind that this little follow route can sit and can occupy. And then from there, we can take the idea of using these crossing routes to build smarter and better play action. And a way that we can do that is a very modern football, modern pro style look. And that is where we would run play action off of whatever look that we would want to give. And so where Wisconsin, we want to run wide zone. That's fine. We hit here. Again, we send our blocking scheme with it. And where we would run play action last year and then just send him on a bootleg and usually end up running out of space by the time he gets to the edge, we're just going to set that play action and we're going to set up. And then from that point, we are going to run double post. And the way that we would do this is, first thing, I got my formation wrong. Let's get out here a little bit more. Okay, and this is a little bit differently than how I drew it up on the companion piece that's on Substack, but it's the same general idea. Is we use this action to set up post on the front side, and then we would send our slot in, which is essentially a post, but we would bring him a lot steeper in his angle. A lot of times we would run this even as, again, just a straight crossing route and create high-low stress here, and then also give eye candy when it comes for this safety to want to come down in the run fit. And that's where the stress would be created. And then we would have usually some kind of flat route, and then again some kind of trailing route coming in from behind this crossing route, whether it be a dig or a curl, comeback, whatever. So we use play action, and we built in an intermediate first read, which then if we get a reaction, that sets up the whole shot. It's not setting up the whole shot and then it taking too long to develop. By the time we get there, we can't get to any of these routes underneath. So this is another example of how we can use intermediate passing routes to fix one of our reoccurring issues last season, where a play like any kind of flood concept that we would run off a play action, we usually end up running out of real estate by the time we get there. Here, it's a quick turnaround. It's an easy read. We high-low, we inside out, and if we don't have anything, we've got a check down or we've got space in behind. So another example of how it looks like the Badgers are moving forward by not only incorporating similar concepts and running them different ways, but taking some of our offensive principles from last year and flat out fixing the problems that we had. All right, and next up, I want to talk about how we can use complementary schemes to give the defense similar looks, but to open up new lanes in the in the running game. And first I want to talk about, obviously the wide zone has become our base scheme, and it is a good all-purpose scheme where there's so many different defensive fronts that we can attack, etc. Really like that. But what you really need to be able to do is the concept with the wide zone is simple. It is to get the defense to overcommit and to get themselves out of position by how hard they're trying to chase down and not lose the edge. So with a front like this, we're getting out. Again, we're just trying to run. So the center, we want to try to wall out here. We want to get our guard out. We want to get our tackle out. And then we want to cut off on the backside. We want to get these linebackers then to overcommit. And then by overcommitting, you create the cutback lane. And it's a really sound scheme. So what you also need to be able to do is give a similar backfield action, but then have a complement to it in case these defenders get to be more fundamentally sound and they are not crashing downfield as hard. We still want to get those same alleys. One way you could do that off of the wide zone is with the pin and pull. So we're going to give similar action, but instead of running everybody to the sideline, we're going to create a series of down blocks. And the example that we saw from the Badgers was down blocking with the tight end, down blocking with our guards or base, whatever we want to call it, and then working a pin and pull where we get our play side tackle to get out in space, and we get our center to pull around and either get into that space created by the pulling guard or get himself outside. Same backfield action, but with the guards attacking downhill differently, you're going to create different lanes. But more importantly is once these linebackers start playing more downhill and start not overcommitting to the wide zone, you can use a gap scheme to help clean these guys up. So, if this nickel is getting his contain and he's getting downhill, especially we see him squeezing based off of the down block from the defensive end, or from the tight end. If that defensive end is playing outside, that's fine. We're still going to continue with a down block, and we would work to climb here because we want to create action inside if he's reading. If he does that, we're going to get a squeeze here. And by doing so, we're going to get a pickup right here. The end is going to take himself out of the play, and he could either be picked up by the center coming across, or he's just going to take himself out of the play. We're going to get a hat on the linebacker, and then we're going to have another hat there waiting for the backside linebacker if he gets there, if he's not cut off by the backside tackle. And then with the same backfield action, we still have the ability to run off tackle, and we still have the ability to cut back. So same backfield action, different blocking scheme, reacting to how the defense is trying to learn from their mistakes in the wide zone, and it creates more opportunities going from zone scheme to a man scheme to a gap scheme. So that's one way we can compensate for a defensive adjustment to our base scheme. Another thing that we can do is, again, we can adjust here a little bit. And let's go more like this. Let's try to get them to be a little more in the box. Yeah, they're really not overcommitting. Okay? We'll get a situation like this. This is a great chance to run the flop inside zone. You can do this from pistol or from sidecar, where we're going to get our running back downhill to the B gap. Quarterback is just going to hinge open and present his back to the defensive end, but he's got his eyes here. And so when we get our inside zone to the play side, I'm going to double team to the backer, double team to the backer, kick out here. We're going to read here. When the quarterback turns his back to this defensive end, even if for a stretch handoff, it really gives him the idea that he can get across and he can push to squeeze from the backside. Another idea with the quarterback turning his back is this will linebacker sometimes tends to get nosy. And he might try to get downhill, which is what we want to see. We're going to talk about the will linebacker later. But anyways, by keeping his eye here, once we see him squeezing parallel to the line of scrimmage, the QB is then able to pull and get out in space. Colton Joseph ran this a ton at Old Dominion. We actually even ran it a few times with Carter Smith towards the end of the season. And if this will linebacker is doing a good job of staying home and is able to close, a great variation that I saw Old Dominion use that I would love to see here is to give an option out here where our slot receiver just run a little bubble and turn this into a triple option, where if this will linebacker decides to crash, that's fine. We'll pull it. We'll rip it out here, and then we'll get upfield out in this general direction. If not, they have to bring somebody down, and by doing so, we create options down the field. So this is simple. We have plenty of run schemes where our quarterback turns his back to this backside defensive end, whether it's to read out here or to just give a dive or wide zone stretch handoff. So by adding a read complement to those type of run schemes where we actually are still able to attack this backside guy, it really is going to put these type of players in conflict of assignment. is whatever they do is right, is wrong. No matter if they fit the run correctly or if they don't, it creates options in the passing, or excuse me, in the running game. And that's all we're looking for. We're looking for conflicts of assignment and being able to punish defenders for making what they assume is the correct choice. All right, and then finally, to bring this all together, and one of the key selling points that brought Colton Joseph to Wisconsin and that solidified the partnership between him and Jeff Grimes was the way that they ran the passing game with Zach Wilson in 2020 at BYU. And if you look at the Jeff Grimes offense of 2020, what you saw was a real interesting mix of this heavy wide zone 12 personnel running game with very air raid style passing concepts, like we've talked about, crossing routes, and especially mesh. And when you've been watching the clips of the players, the receivers running routes in spring, we saw over and over again them running variations of mesh. And by doing so, mesh is one of those great passing plays that you create both horizontal and vertical stress. And it is a passing concept that is equally adept at attacking man-to-man coverage and zone. And one of the interesting ways that I think we could see them running it is we saw a couple clips of them lining up in a 3-by-1 look against air. There were no running backs, where they would run the mesh between the slot receiver and the backside number one, two receivers. Okay, and they would have this outside receiver run across what we call a hunt route, where he's just trying to find his way over the middle of the ball. And in fact, they would even run it more, fix that route, where we're even more condensed formation, just get to 10 or 12 yards and just sit down over the ball. But what we didn't see when we were running this is no running backs. But if they're only running three receivers, that must, at least in my eyes, think that they are in some kind of two-back set. And one way that I saw them run last spring, which they didn't do much last year, which they would run wheel routes from the running back out of the backfield. So if we're in a two-back look and we're running mesh, then an easy way to do that is to run a wheel out of the backfield either on one side or both sides to give you a late vertical push, or you convert one of these two routes to a flat, and that creates high-low stress and inside-out stress to create space for the mesh. Regardless of how you add the running backs, I like the idea of running the mesh out of a three-receiver set. It's a different way of running a real basic concept. And I know somewheres Mike Leach is smiling that his key concepts are still, doesn't matter what type of offense you run, you find a way to run the air raid. And that always makes me happy. So I think we're going to see a lot more mesh this year. We got a lot more speed, got a lot more size in the receiver core. We got more depth in the running backs. This is a type of concept that creates both high, low, and inside-out stress and really puts the defense in conflict. And with that, we are going to bring this video to a close. And like I said at the beginning, what I have come up with here is pure speculation based off of my opinions of what basically I would do with the play beyond the 4 seconds that we saw it this spring. Now, there are a lot of universal truths in football, and no matter what offense you run, you kind of come to similar conclusions on a lot of these plays. But if it was me calling plays, it was me designing the offense, these are the plays and the schemes and the ideas that I would extrapolate from those key moments from this spring. Could be entirely different, but that's going to be a great thing. It's going to give us more to study once we get to fall camp and once we get into the season, actually have game film to take a look at. But what I see here is the Badgers coaching staff filling in some of the gaps in the offense that we had last season, expanding on what we're good at, building to fix what we're not, and all in all, hopefully it gives us a chance to have, at minimum, a semi-competent offense. And if we do that with the schedule we have, we should get back to the idea of winning most of the gimmies, being competitive in the games, and by doing so, having a record that reflects that schedule. 10 years ago, that's good enough to win the Big Ten West. There's no Big Ten West anymore, but similar result can give similar numbers in the standings, which can give similar ideas in the postseason. At least that's the theory. All right, and that's where we're going to leave it here. If you want to read in more about these plays and concepts that I talked about today, I will link my Substack article that I wrote up on what I saw this spring and expanded on these plays a little bit more. As we get into the summer months, I hope to talk more about the schemes that we learned from this spring. Didn't see a lot about the defense, but there's some more ideas we could talk about springing forward from the defense. So it's a long summer. Hope to be able to fill it with some more Dairy Ray content and some more in-depth looking at the scheme and the players so we can hit fall camp running. But that'll be it for today. Thank you, as always, for watching, and we'll see you next time.